I appreciate the opportunity to speak as someone who knew Ross as an undergraduate mainly, but also then in industry working on problems Ross occasionally approved of and at companies that Ross invariably disapproved of. But I actually met him before starting as an undergraduate. So in the summer of 2009, I came up to Cambridge by myself for the day to attend an event organized by Bill Thompson from the BBC called PuntCon. It was punting to Grantchester and a picnic. And I arrived at Scudamores and got into a punt, and I found myself afloat in a boat sitting opposite Ross. I had no idea who he was or what I'd got myself into, but that boat ride introduced me to how unique Ross was, and I'm incredibly grateful to have met him then and stayed in touch. The idea, if you can think back to when you were 18 and imagine being trapped in a boat opposite Ross. So Ross could certainly be intimidating at first impression, and this boat ride was no exception, but it quickly became clear that this was coming from a place of curiosity and care. At 18 years old, to have someone like Ross be deeply interested in your opinions, experiences, to engage with you, to challenge you on the things that you say as an 18-year-old, and to kind of treat you as an equal is a gift that he just seemed to give to people, to everyone. He would meet someone, he would be interested, he would disagree, but he would engage with them. I think Ross did a lot of his work as much on punts and at picnics as through his papers, and I think that was represented in the type of work that he did in security. Computers don't exist in a vacuum, and to treat them as such would fall at the first hurdle. As an undergraduate here in this room, Ross taught a second-year course called software engineering when I was here. Ross was an engaging lecturer, and this innocuously named course taught many of its lessons via repeated case studies of how software can go horribly wrong. Ross could be emphatic in how he told these stories, and I think that left its mark on hundreds of undergraduates he taught over the years, and he made the world a better place in the process. Everyone he touched thought about computers and thought about society differently because of that. Ross practiced what he preached, and when he saw something going wrong, it wasn't just a lecture, it wasn't a case study afterwards, he was a vocal critic who would call out idiotic policies. He did that with computer security, but also, I'm glad Alice mentioned, he did that with the university. He didn't just shout from the outside, but he was elected, he was on the council, and he made change. And it would have been very interesting to be a fly on the wall at some of those meetings, I'm sure. We need more people like Ross, and I'm just grateful for the group of people we have here today celebrating his life and work, and thank you for keeping it going.
Hello, I'm John Norton. I'm suffering from imposter syndrome because I'm not a computer scientist. And this is a very frightening audience. This is how I remember him, as one of the really unforgettable figures in my life. Fabulously erudite, generous with his knowledge and friendship, fiercely independent, and fearless. He had a kind of flinty integrity which I found irresistible. It meant that he was often, and I saw this myself many times, he was often a real thorn in the side of university, governmental, and academic establishments. And they all discovered that he was no pushover. And I remember being sometime in the same room when he would say things that in Cambridge are never said, but always thought. He was as academically distinguished as is possible to be. A world authority on a whole range of subjects of which you know more than I do. But because I'm only an engineer, a lower form of pond life, I really only understood It's only when I heard him give his lecture, when he got the Ada Lovelace Medal, that I fully began to appreciate the extent and depth of his knowledge and research. Now, I know that some people found him formidable and indeed sometimes forbidding, because, among other things, he didn't do small talk, as you know. And yet, if you were lucky enough to get to know him, as I was, he was utterly wonderful company. He and I used to walk around the 800 Wood, this anniversary wood outside Cambridge, with his two lovely dogs, deep in conversation about a range of topics. The sordid ingenuity of cyber criminals, the short-sightedness of academic administrators, the intrusiveness of national security agencies, but as well Celtic folk music, of which he was astonishingly knowledgeable. And as it happens, he was a piper, and I am not a piper, but I'm a great admirer of uilleann piping, a distinctive form of musical instrument from my country, Ireland. I learned such a lot from those conversations with him. He changed the way I looked at computing, and he alerted me to the political economy of the technology, which has shaped my thinking about it ever since, and indeed led me eventually to found a research centre in this university to investigate it further. He always spoke his mind, as you know, which is why when an email from him would arrive at 8 a.m. on Sunday mornings, I knew he had read my Observer column and had something to say about it. And accordingly, I would sit up in bed and brace myself before reading further. The last time I saw him was a few weeks before his death, when we had both snuck into a talk given by a guy called Matt Clifford, who had become Rishi Sunak's go-to man on, quotes, AI security, and later wrote Keith Starmer's policy for mainstreaming AI into the bloodstream of the current British government. Now, Clifford was a tech bro from Central Casting. He had been invited by a student group, so Ross and I and Johnny Penn were the only adults in the room. Before Clifford embarked on his boosterish talk, the kind of stuff you only hear in Silicon Valley normally, I got out my pen to take notes, and then noticed that Ross had opened his MacBook. So I put my pen away, because he always took the most detailed and accurate notes of any event he attended. And I knew that if I needed to check something later about Clifford's performance, and I did, Ross's record would provide the evidence I needed. At 5 p.m. on the day he died, he had an email conversation with John Crowcroft about the possibility of harnessing generative AI to add spice to his campaign against forced retirement. And he had sent John a link to a song he had just prompted Suno.ai to create to enliven the campaign. As John observed afterwards, it could almost serve as an obituary. His death marked the passing of he's the last of the great generation of computer scientists who made Cambridge such a pioneering centre of research in the field. Maurice Wilkes, Roger Needham, David Wheeler, Karen Spark-Jones, and now Ross. I feel privileged to have known him. We have a saying in Gaelic that captures him precisely. This is how it goes. Ní bheidh lehéid a rís ann. We will not see his like again. We won't. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carl Landwehr. I can't say that I was a close personal friend of Ross's or even a close collaborator, but I was a professional colleague and had many interactions with him. I probably first met Ross at the first ACM CCS conference in '93 when he presented Why Crypto Systems Fail, though I remember more clearly the Oakland conference in about 1995 where he reported on security issues in devices for the retail purchase of electric power in South Africa, I think with Johannes Bezuidenhout, if I remember correctly. And I was just fascinated even to learn about the whole culture there and what was happening. In 1996, he was kind enough to invite me to Cambridge for 3 weeks to participate in a workshop he organized with Peter Landrock and Roger Needham at the Isaac Newton Institute, which remains a very happy memory for me. Our paths crossed many times over the years, and I always enjoyed the exchanges. I should say, actually, I remember the announcement for the first Weiss workshop, Economics and Information Security, and it was something that I had thought about for a long time, and I said, I must go to this workshop. I guess I'll have to write a paper, since that was the only way to get there. So I did, and subsequently, I think Gene Camp shepherded that paper into the proceedings. So that was important for me. Most recently, I used his security engineering textbook in a course, Cybersecurity for Future Presidents, that I developed after retiring from the National Science Foundation. And I used a couple of other books in that course as well, but that book was really a good backstop for both explainable security and also more in depth. It has both layers. And the other interesting thing about that, I think, that reflects on him is his desire to keep that in the open literature. That is not, you could download that book. So the students didn't have to buy a $60 book. They could download whatever they wanted and read it. And I think that was one of his other passions as I saw it. A particular incident, though, that sticks in my mind occurred in 2007. I had recently assumed the role of editor-in-chief of Security and Privacy magazine, and Ross had written a review of a book by Gary McGraw on software security. One of my first calls for help from the staff came because Ross had actually read the copyright release form. He was asked to sign for the review, and he noticed that it called for him to personally indemnify the IEEE under certain, maybe unlikely conditions. He would have none of that. The solution in the end was to publish the article without the signed release. I think this small incident exemplifies both Ross's attention to detail, his willingness to confront authority, and his unwillingness to compromise when he felt he was in the right. I will continue to miss his lively and inspiring presence in the technical community. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aing. I'm a PhD student supervised by Alice, and Ross was my second advisor. I may be one of the most junior here to speak about Ross, so I'm not going to repeat his remarkable contributions, but I'm going to share some personal things. So I first arrived in Cambridge in October 2019, and there was one Christmas I could not travel back home because it's very far away. It's in the other side of the world, and I was alone. So for some reasons, Ross learned about that, and Ross texted me, hey, do you want to go out for dinner? And then we went to a restaurant, I think his favorite, and with him bringing a bottle of wine. And I think this made me feel much better when I have no friends and family surrounding me. In late 2020, I returned to the UK, but I got stuck in a room far away from the lab because of the COVID-19 restrictions. So Ross came help me collect and scan all of my documents, driving back and forth multiple times from the lab to the room where I was staying. And when I concerned about the infection risk, and I suggested waiting until I finished my self-quarantine, he told me, oh, don't risk the visa. I can handle hazardous materials. Look, I pick up dog pools. All the time I take the dogs out for a walk, and I can't imagine that your passport is more hazardous. So he took risk himself, to ensure that I did not have to. And Ross cared about my family as much as he cared about me. In 2023, my uncle got a brain tumor. And once Ross learned about that, well, we often have some discussions before we head back home in the corridor. So we talk about random things. So once Ross learned about that, he tried his best to connect me with the best surgeons in Cambridge and in India. The surgeons and I had some email exchanges, but my uncle unfortunately did not get to travel to the UK, but Ross' help means so much to me and to my family. Ross gave me compliments when I did good work, even for minor achievements. And he was incredibly generous, always spending his time and patience correcting my many silly mistakes, not just in research, but also in my English. He often told me, your English is broken, but always explain why it is wrong and how should I fix it, how I should fix it. The last major thing we did together was moving his bookshelf from the old office to the new one because Cambridge forced him to retire. He told me he had been in the old office for over 20 years and he would miss it. And he hoped he could stay in the new office for another 20 years. I wish the same. He showed me a card his mom and dad had given him a long time ago. And with his great smile, I knew that he deeply cherished it. So I always wanted to have a picture with him when I graduate, and I promised to give him a copy of my thesis later, but sadly I will never have that chance. So I admire Ross not only for his vast contributions in many ways, his enthusiasm, his energy, his passion, his inspiration, but also for his kindness and the way he treats students and colleagues. He always finds the opportunities to lift me and his students up. Nature is cruel, and death is part of life's beauty. And my life has been much, much better because of Ross, and I believe so as many others. The last paper Alice and I have written with Ross just got accepted this morning. So if he were here today, I'm sure he will be very happy about that. And tomorrow, I'm having my Viva, my PhD Viva tomorrow morning, and I will do my best as a way to say thank you to Ross. And I miss him very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sven Dietrich. I'm a professor at the City University of New York. And I was thinking, when was it that I first met Ross? Because when I think about Ross, there's one word that comes to mind: inspirational. So I was thinking back, it must have been around 2000 at the Oakland conference. And then this morning, Kevin actually reminded me probably where I first met him, and that was the summer of 1997 at a workshop at Rutgers University. And I looked it up, he gave 2 talks there, one on steganography and one on what he was also very much involved with, the security of clinical information systems. And the one thing I remember about Ross is his connection to the real world, making impact in real world systems. And I respected him for that, and I thought, okay, this is someone who wants to consider things that work, and they work well and securely. So as I interacted with him professionally over the following few years, that aspect was critical. When I chaired a conference in the one community where we interacted a lot, which is the financial cryptography and data security community, he talked about RFID. You had in 2007, you had the advent of RFID credit cards, and there was a panel that he was on, RFID, yes or no. So he very much wanted to work with that. He was involved with the security of the banking systems and the banking cards, and he was not afraid to show that things did not work. And that's something I really respected about him. He was very outspoken. When we talk about outspoken, others have mentioned that he was outspoken about making things accessible. One about open access, something that was mentioned here. He fought for open access of all the research papers, but he was also into blogging. So in the financial crypto world, he was very adamant about using his blog, Light Blue Touch Paper, and he was live blogging the conference and making sure that everybody knew what was going on. That, to me, was impressive. The time that he dedicated when he should have been listening to the talk, at the same time relaying the information out to the world and making the papers that were going on accessible for everyone to appreciate and maybe investigate further. His textbook, Security Engineering, I had the chance of reviewing it and proliferating more of what he was doing, of course, has made a huge impact. That was one aspect. But the one thing that only came later into me knowing him, so if we're thinking about the 27 years that we interacted, that's a long time. It was only later in life, and through Shireen here, that we started getting a bit friendlier. Ross wasn't always easy, but later in life, we realized that we were going to dinner in the financial crypto. And I remember one evening where we were in St. Kitts, and I saw another aspect of Ross, sort of a connoisseur, somebody appreciating life, when we had, with Peter Landrock and Ray Hirschfeld, and Shireen, you were there as well, a rum and cognac tasting. And that was a different aspect of Ross that I had not expected, but recognized, okay, here's the researcher, here's the professional, but here's also the human side, very much grounded. So that's something I respect about him and I miss about him. Thank you very much.
So, thank you. I'm Fabio Massacci, and I've been knowing Ross for a very long time when this department was not even here, but in Pembroke Street. And I associate to the notion of controversy, right? And I remember when a few years ago, just before the COVID, we were at the lunch at the dinner in his college, and he was disagreeing with the economics of insurance with Kenneth Arrow, except that Kenneth is a Nobel Prize in economics, and Ross was actually having the good side of the argument. But let me go back to 29 years in 1996, because it is actually a cause of why doing security. It was a mistake. I joined here as I was supposed to work with Robin Milner on a logic of authentication. Except that at that time, Robin Milner was elected head of department, didn't have any time. So I said, oh, Fabio, why don't you work with Roger Needham and Larry Paulson? They have a project on logic of authentication. And so that was interesting, so I started to work with them. But I didn't know anything of security. And so I attended a course of an unknown lecturer at that time. The book was this side, it was green. It was the security triples. And this lecturer in 1996 was a certain Ross Anderson. And then they also had a meeting, I think Carl was mentioning that meeting, it was the Newton Institute, in which all the good and the great of security and cryptography arrived and they gave talks. And at that time, most of the talks were about crypto, modular arithmetic, maybe a bit of logic, formal model, traces. And there was So all nice, and there was one talk that was different from anybody else. And it was given by this obscure lecturer did the talk barefooted, actually. And the talk was about crime and punishment, of subverting smart meters. It was completely different than all of the other talks of the audience. And for me, that was it. That was interesting. And that's it. Thank you.
And I've got a photo if you can show it. It doesn't matter if you can't. Frank, put it on the desktop. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I prepared 2 3-minute pitches, and I only just decided which one to give. My name's Andrew Watson. I was an undergraduate here at the department in the 80s, although here was then over on the new museum site. And I first encountered Ross it must have been about 92 or 93 when I went to this talk entitled Why Crypto Systems Fail. And I read Frank's account, and I think, Frank, you were probably at the same talk. Just out of curiosity, was anybody else there back in the new museum site in the 90s? So it was a compelling talk given by somebody who obviously knew and cared a lot about his subject. And what impressed himself upon me then was just what a staunch advocate this man was for those who'd been wronged by banking IT. And I'm going to tell you, perhaps again, the story of John Munden, which some of you may know, and Frank again has covered in his write-up. But I think this goes to the heart of the man. John was a policeman who lived and worked here in Cambridgeshire, and who returned from a foreign holiday in 1992 to find his Halifax Building Society account empty. His statement showed 6 ATM withdrawals totalling £460, which he had not made. When he demanded a refund, Halifax had him prosecuted for trying to obtain money by deception. Ross was recruited as an expert witness in the case, but unfortunately only after the first trial had begun. He spent at least 3 days in the court there testifying about phantom ATM withdrawals, the Halifax's systems not meeting industry standards and related topics. And meanwhile, Halifax employees stood up and gave technically illiterate evidence that its mainframe software had no bugs because it was written in assembler, and therefore any errors would cause an abend, for those who remembered abend. Basically, it would core dump. It also emerged that Halifax had not properly investigated over 150 other disputed ATM transactions. And this goes to Tyler, what you were saying about consumer protections in the UK at the time. However, despite the lack of direct evidence that Mr. Munden had made those withdrawals, because it turned out that the cameras in the branch were conveniently not working on those days, he was nevertheless convicted with no direct evidence. So as Ross assisted the lawyers who were preparing Mr. Munden's appeal, the police were considering whether he should lose his job, and with it his house and his pension. In response, Ross put out a call on the ACM risks mailing list to readers with relevant expertise to write to Munden's chief constable, challenging the Halifax evidence, and my own small contribution was I was one of those people who wrote a letter. The week before the scheduled appeal hearing, the Halifax produced a flawed report from its auditors claiming to have examined its IT systems and found them secure. The court ruled, however, that Ross must be given equal access to compile a defence report. And surprisingly enough, the Halifax completely refused to comply for about 9 months. So that eventually, when the appeal was heard, happily, the judge, ruled that, quote, and this is worth quoting, "When a case turns on computers or similar equipment, then as a matter of common justice, the defence must have access to test and see whether there is anything making the computers fallible." And for those of you who live in the UK, that's a lesson that was not learnt, for instance, in the recent Post Office Horizon IT disaster. With the prosecution computer evidence therefore excluded from the case, the prosecution collapsed and John Munden was acquitted and got his job back, only after 4 very, very stressful years. And apparently, the stack of letters from Risks readers that arrived on the Chief Constable's desk, from all those people that Ross had appealed to, arrived just after the new Chief Constable had been appointed, and it made such an impression that he delayed the decision on Munden's future until after the appeal, saving his job. Well done, Ross. Afterwards, Ross wrote, "For the computer security community, the moral is obvious. If you are designing a system whose functions include providing evidence, it had better be able to withstand hostile review." So no time to say more. I just want to briefly point to this picture here. I worked later on with Ross on civil liberties campaigning. The UK government in about 2005 proposed a mandatory identity card system for all UK residents. It had a very vague specification. They started to they got the legislation passed. They started to spend a ton of money on implementing this thing with essentially no workable specification. So it was obviously going to fail. Ross helped us campaign against it. That's him speaking at a No to ID campaign meeting here in Cambridge. And that's how I will remember him, making a forceful, eloquent, but technically sound argument on the subject that he obviously cared very deeply about. So thank you all, and goodbye, Ross. Thank you for everything.
My name is Mark Tobias. I'm a lawyer from America. I started picking locks when I was 15 and have lectured many times over the last 20 years here because of Ross. And a few years ago, I was here giving a lecture, and it occurred to me that maybe I should write a book, the flip side of Ross's, called Insecurity Engineering, because we work for all the major lock companies in the world, figuring out how to open their locks when they cannot be opened. And the problem in the industry is that there is insecurity engineering in the lock industry. Maybe some of you have attended some of my lectures here. And so I talked to Ross about it. This was at least 5-6 years ago. He said, "That's a great idea." So he introduced me to our publisher, John Wiley, and Wiley bought the idea. The result was, after my pandemic sabbatical of 3 years, the book came out last year called Insecurity Engineering, 700-page text. And all during the process, Ross would provide input, ideas, suggestions, critiques on the text. So it actually came out quite well. What I really remember about Ross is basically he said, "What's so complicated about sticking a key in a lock?" And I said, "Well, Ross, it's not complicated. It is complicated to make it work properly and securely." He used to ask me about the locks in the building here, which one of our clients manufacture. And I kept getting these emails from him and a couple telephone calls. How do I open this lock in my file cabinet in my house? And he said, "Why? How does this work?" I said, "I'd have to come there to show you." So I will deeply miss him. I've continued to lecture here, and he was a real mentor, and everybody knows in the industry what he contributed, and I shall be forever grateful for him allowing me to sort of usurp the name of his book in a way to write mine, and I hope it helps the industry as well. Thank you.